to There Is a Method to the Madness. My name is Rob Maxwell, and I am an exercise physiologist and personal trainer. I'm the owner of Maxwell's Fitness Programs, and I've been in business since 1994. Today's podcast is brought to you by Jonathan Lynn Gilden at the Gilden Group at Realty Pros. I'm telling you what, people, they are the absolute best. They are absolute hustlers. The market might be slowing down a little bit, and that's the more reason to have a good real estate agent you can trust. You can trust both of them, great married couple, and their team. Please reach out to them if you're selling your house or you're looking for something else at thegildengroup.com. All right, so today we're going to talk about some of the systems of the body, and most notably the endocrine system. And I'm going to talk a lot about stress and hormones and how they impact people, because that has come up with some of my followers asking me questions about that, and they said, you know, it was more of a personal issue they were having. And I said, well, no, it's a great topic because I hear this all the time from people, and I don't think people really realize how much stress impacts their life. So I want to kind of explain why, because that is the method to the madness. Let's understand. The more knowledge we have, as they say, knowledge is power, and I absolutely believe that. So the more knowledge we have about our body, the more we're going to be able to help our body. All right, so let's talk about this system, all right? Before I do that, I just want to state to you all of the systems of the body, because I think they would be good to go over at different times of the year during this podcast. Again, today we're doing the endocrine system, which is your hormonal system, because it's the one really that's most impactful on stress. And actually kind of the reason you might feel stress, but it's got a job to do, like all of our body systems. We have the digestive system. I think you know what that one is. We have the respiratory system. We have the skeletal system. We have the nervous system. We have the circulatory system. We have the reproductive system, again, the endocrine system. We have the integumentary system, your skin, hair, and nails. And we have the muscular system, your muscles. Today, we're going to talk about the endocrine system, the old stress, all right? I think you'll find this interesting. I know I do. And I've often said that it's so underrated when it comes to health and fitness. Like, people don't understand the power of the endocrine system. They don't understand the power of hormones. They don't understand the power of hormones when it comes to weight loss, when it comes to performance, when it comes to stress. All right, so let me talk a little bit about the stress component first. There's a gentleman, and he was endocrinologist, and his name was Selye, and he pretty much invented the stress response circuit that we know today. Like, he's the one that put it on the map, figured it all out, and we've been using his model ever since. So he invented the stress response system, how our body basically responds to stress, how it's supposed to respond to stress, and what happens when stress goes too far in the wrong direction, because it can, obviously. Hope it's obvious to you anyway. And his model basically says that stress is like a three-wave deal, all right? The first part is the alarm response. It's an immediate response, alarm. Your body knows a stressor just occurred. That could be you go to step out in front of a car and you realize the car is coming, so you step back. That's an alarm. Literally, your alarm when you wake up in the morning is an alarm. It's a stress. Cold weather can be a stress. Like, almost anything can be a stress. So essentially what he was saying was the initial part of stress, the alarm, is very, very normal. It's our body's way of protecting us. And I'm going to go into the different hormones as we go, for sure. I'm going to go over all of them, not all of them because there are over 50, but I'm going to go over some of the more critical ones, and especially the ones related to stress. But as soon as we're hit with an initial stressor, keyword stressor, the thing that causes the stress. Our body gets a burst of adrenaline. Too much adrenaline literally will stress you out. So there's nothing wrong with the alarm stage. We need it. Adrenaline shoots off and it enables your body to fight or flight because that's what you might need to do. It's that initial push you might need to step back into the driveway as you step out into the road. It's that initial push you might, I'm just thinking of the things that occur kind of quite commonly around me. You're letting your dog out the back door and all of a sudden you realize the kitty has poked its head out the sliding glass door and your initial response is, whoa, 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 you're not an outdoor cat, get back, get back. That's a stressor. You come home and your garbage can has been pushed out in the middle of the road. That is a stressor. All of a sudden, your very peaceful mood, you get a little bit more agitated because adrenaline all of a sudden started flowing through your veins. And then some of the obvious ones, you're out in traffic and somebody locks up their brakes, and next thing you know, you go from zoning out and completely defocused to raging focus, hitting your brakes. Your pupils are all dialed in and dilated and really focused, and all of a sudden you went from nothing to something really quick. Well, that's adrenaline, and that all happens in the very first stage, very normal alarm stage. Okay, so think alarm stage and think adrenaline. All right, so next is the good part of stress. Stress isn't bad. We have to understand that stress is really neither good nor bad. It just is. Stressors are out there, and you'd say, well, I wish I had a life of no stress. Well, then you'd have no growth. So you have to have stress to grow, mentally, physically, spiritually. Come on, those are all pretty obvious, right? If you don't stress your body by running more, you're not going to become a more efficient runner and a better runner. It takes the stress of doing it. If you don't lift weights, which is absolutely a stress, your muscles are not going to become bigger and stronger. If you don't study by forcing yourself to read material that you're supposed to read or that you want to read, you're not going to grow your intellectual capacity. You're not going to get smarter. Typically, people don't grow spiritually unless they've been stressed. It usually takes some kind of a life moment. So, it's often quoted and stated that people that get into Alcoholics Anonymous and Narcotics Anonymous and different 12-step programs become far more spiritual, or actually find spirituality for the very first time in their lives. And they would have never found that if they didn't go through that stressful period of basically being downtrodden and hooked on drugs and hitting a bottom. So that's a stress, right? So we need stress. Now, obviously, that's probably a little bit too much stress at that moment in time, but we need to be stressed to grow. It's critical. The real key is how do we manage stress, okay? So, in the resistance phase, that's phase 2, that's a good thing. That's when we grow. So if we have just enough stress, a little more stress than our body can tolerate, a little bit more, we're going to grow more resistance to it. So if we have been running and we add a quarter mile to our runs, go from 3 miles to 3.25, that's an appropriate amount of additional stress. Most likely, unless we've reached a peak, we are going to grow forward from it. We won't go backwards. So, and I'll get into this as I summarize, but the key to management of stress is progressive overload of everything, meaning just a little bit more than what your body is accustomed to. And you will build resistance to it, which is absolutely what you want. You want the resistance. You will come back stronger. Your body will form an adaptation in this resistance phase if the load is appropriate. Now, that is a very hard balance. I get it. But there are some tricks we can learn to help. Now, the person who asked me is a woman, and she has been told by her doctor that overstressed, super low levels of body fat, hard training and whatnot might hurt her chances of becoming fertile. So she's been battling that a little bit. She said, essentially, is there truth to that? Can stress do this? And I said, absolutely. Lower body fat levels, too low, overstressed in workouts is going to definitely ding the endocrine system. There is no question about it. Not to the point of no repair, but ding it until a balance can be achieved. And when the balance can be achieved, the restorative processes occur and good things can happen. Oftentimes when women are, and I'm using women here in this case because yes, it's the women that can get pregnant. So if women have been overtrained, they've been maybe over-exercising, potentially under-eating or whatever, it is going to change the sex hormones and the menstrual cycles can be missed. And with all this, we start to get into overstress, and it is very hard to become fertile in those situations. So, we have to watch our endocrine system. We have to know how to manipulate it to get whatever we want out of it. So it's very, very critical. We want that resistance, but we don't want to go into the third stage, which is called exhaustion. Exhaustion is essentially when we have some form of an overbalance in the wrong direction of stress, some sort of breakdown. Now, if we're just talking physical stress, and when I say just, I don't mean it, to be flippant. I mean, I'm just using an example of an athlete. So if an athlete is in the exhaustion stage, it can be two things. If we're talking the endocrine system and nervous system, that's called overtraining. And their performances are not going to be any good at all. Once they go race, once they go play their sport, they're not going to be able to compete very well because they have basically an imbalance of their hormones. Their negative hormones are circulating the bloodstream a lot more than the positive hormones. So that's overtraining. It could also be physical breakdown and injury. If we overstress our bones, creating stress fractures, we're going to become injured. If we overstress our tendons and our muscles, our soft tissues, and we continue to overstress them and not allow them to rest and heal, we're going to get soft tissue injuries such as tendinitis or bursitis or muscle pulls. So that in the physical sense is just a very easy example of what happens when we don't follow progressive overload. And we essentially, I almost said it, listen to your body, but that we say that all the time, and I don't think most people really are even capable of doing that. So I'm not even going to say that. I'm going to say instead, become far more programmed and disciplined in your training. In other words, instead of always trying to keep up with the Joneses, always trying to race what other people are doing. In other words, you might see that they're running 5 miles every day and you jump out there and you start running 5 miles a day, even though you've been running 3 miles every other day. Don't do that. Like, that is the recipe for overtraining, overdoing it, and potential injury. Instead, see where you're at and add 10% to it weekly, and then every 4th week have a back off week where you're training at maybe 75% of your volume. So that's not really listening to your body. That's being smart about it, because I said I don't think most people have even the capabilities to listen to their body, especially nowadays when everybody is on their smartphones. I mean, we're so out of tune. I mean, that'd be like, my piano, and yes, I'm taking piano lessons and I love it. My piano is so out of tune right now that my instructor who works with me remotely can notice it all the time. I can't. Why? Because it's out of tune. Well, that's kind of how we are with our bodies. We're so out of tune we won't even recognize it. So instead, we just have to get smart, and that is the key way, which is following progressive overload and periodization in our training, which I just spoke about. Okay, so if we get to that exhaustion stage with our hormones, we're in deep doo-doo. Okay, that means that our cortisol levels are really, really high, which is going to keep us stressed out all the time. That essentially means like we have a ton of adrenaline always flowing through our system, even though there's no alarm. That's not a good feeling, right? That's that feeling of just constant stress. that means that you're overtrained and you're overstressed, and that is not a good thing. Cortisol, when we have too much cortisol in our system, it is very hard to let go of that additional weight we're trying to lose. And sometimes people make fun of that and say, oh, you're just not dieting enough. It's like, that's not true. The endocrine system is so critical. I mean, we have to basically dial it in, and we can get to a point where we are not eating enough at all. We're training too much, we're not sleeping enough, and we're not eating enough. And no, you won't lose weight. Your endocrine system is basically going to fight you back all the time, and it's going to continue. It's like your thermostat. It's like your thermostat for your wall. It's like you're hot and you're hot, you keep turning it down, and every time you turn it down, your thermostat turns it back up. I mean, that's kind of what happens when you have too much cortisol in your system. It fights you back every step of the way. Well, I'm going to eat less, and then it just turns down your thermostat. Oh my God. So it just continues to happen. Why? Because we're stupid, We're not like, other animals. We think too much, and we obsess too much, and we worry too much, and we plan too much. Like we do all these things to ourselves. And so, great Mother Nature said, well, I got to build in some great systems here that are going to protect these idiots, because, they're not like my other creatures, out there, my good dogs that know, like, they've been running and around for a while, and when they're tired, they're just going to lay down in the grass, No, not these guys. They're going to keep hauling ahead, even though they're, already achieved their purpose. So thank God for nature, right? So we have it in us to protect us, right? And that's what it's doing. So don't curse the hormones, learn to work with them and thank God for them. And another example of that's kind of associated to it, just to make a final point on that, is that there are people that have this really strange, bizarre genetic illness, essentially, where they can't feel pain. And, there are people, of course, jokingly like say, oh man, how awesome would that be? I'd be able to run all day and never get tired. I'd lift weights all day. No, you'd be dead, because, and with these people, I'm sure, I really don't know. I didn't study into like what happens with them throughout their life, but I'm sure they kind of have to have a follower and somebody that is protecting them constantly, because we lean down, and I've done it in the last year, lean down on a burner on the stove and immediately burn the hand, pull the hand up really quick and drop a few nice F-bombs and, grab the hand like, you should do when you're sane. And it hurts, but it pulled your hand away. You didn't burn your arm off. So, pain is essential to us, right? So it's kind of like saying, well, I don't want these damn hormones, I don't want this cortisol. It's like, okay, then, you just keep running until you run yourself into the ground. The cortisol is there to pull you back. So is it a bad thing? No. Hormones are what they are. We have to learn how to work with them, all right? So remember, alarm, resistance, exhaustion. Once we get to exhaustion, it's really hard to get out. If it's nervous system exhaustion, that's called a nervous breakdown. That's really changing your life. That's seeing a psychotherapist. That's getting on different kinds of medications, if you're not already. So that is not what we want. Again, if it's physical, it's injury. It could be serious injury. It's lack of performance. So we don't ever want to hit exhaustion. I can't say I've never done it. I mean, I have. I'm sure a lot of you have run yourself into the ground one way or the other. Exhaustion is what we want to avoid, and we avoid it by, again, not necessarily listening to your body unless you're super good at it, like people who do yoga and some of the Eastern meditations and things like that, I think are a lot better at it than us Westerners. We're not really good at all. So we got to get smart. We have to sit down, and we have to use a form of periodization with our exercise, and then figure out a way to do it with the rest of our life too. There's all kinds of different tricks as far as work-rest ratios, but we have to understand that if we overwork, it's not going to help us. We need moderation, and moderation in our country, and I'm speaking for myself, is a very difficult thing. One more final fun fact about Selye is he was an endocrinologist, which is pretty cool. So like he was studying all this from the hormonal perspective. He wasn't just this philosopher that came up with this way to measure stress. He was an endocrinologist who actually studied all the hormones of the body. So look him up, Hans Selye, on that. All right, so what are some of these hormones we have to pay attention to, and how do they react, and then finally how do we control them a little bit better? So I already mentioned cortisol. Cortisol is a stress hormone, and a lot of people, walk around saying it all the time. And hormones basically don't come out by themselves. So when you have adrenaline, when you have dopamine, so dopamine's a good one. It's a happy hormone for sure. Adrenaline is the one that gets you moving, gets you jumping out of the street, gets you fired up for your competition. If you're a rock star, and I love rock music, I think everybody out there knows that, they need to get themselves pumped up to go out and perform. So that's adrenaline, and so these things don't just happen by themselves. Oh, let me get a dose of adrenaline over here. Now, that's not how it works. They happen together, collectively. So with that, you're going to get some cortisol. So sometimes our highs, okay, like our exercise highs, like we just ran the best we ever ran in a 5K, or we just hit a PR on the bench press or whatever. So we're going to have some highs. We're going to have a lot of adrenaline flowing through the system. You're going to have a lot of the dopamine and endorphins, the happy hormones, flowing through the system, but you're also going to have some cortisol. So they all go together, essentially. Now what happens is the other two don't do anything bad. It's just if we get too much cortisol, we're going to start to get overstressed. So we just have to know that, again, it's not a bad thing. We just have an influx of hormones, and too much cortisol is not good. That's our body telling us that we haven't managed it very well. With everything that comes in, we have to have it go out in equal terms, okay? So if we're talking like exercise physiology, we basically start to get anaerobic and can't go any faster when our body can't get rid of the lactate at the same speed we're producing it. And so then we start to slow down. It's true with all of this. We have to be able to get rid of the cortisol at the same rate, if not quicker, than we're producing more cortisol. So cortisol comes with overstress and overwork. So that means the only way we get rid of it is by resting and backing off. All right, so that's one of our biggies. That's cortisol. Just again, there's over 50. I'm just going to go over some of them here. So you got estrogen, testosterone, and progesterone. They are some of our sex hormones. Now, when women start to overtrain, so let's say they're already stressed, okay? Because your body doesn't know the difference between stressors. That was something else that Selye came out and told us that I don't think people knew. I seriously doubt they knew, and I don't think people still know. But a stress is a stress is a stress. So really there's like 3 names for it. There is eustress, which is just a neutral stress, and honestly, I don't even know what you would label a neutral stress. There is distress, so that's you're driving down the road, everything's hunky-dory, and you hear boo! It's like, oh, okay. That's a distress, right? Time to get your speeding ticket. That's a distress. Too much training is a distress. All right. So eustress, I hope I didn't say eustress earlier. Eustress is the neutral stress. Eustress is the positive stress. You're having a baby. You're getting married. You got a new job. You got a raise. Exercise, like those are all like what we would call positive stresses, stresses. Those are great, absolutely. Problem is this: your body doesn't know the difference. So when I say your body, I don't just mean your skeletal system and your muscular system. I mean your endocrine system and your whole system. So your body doesn't know the difference between distress, the siren, the cops, the garbage can in the road, the kitty almost coming out the door, all of that on top of each other. Eustress, positive stress, marriage, babies, new boyfriend, weightlifting, whatever. New stress, again, the weird neutral one, that's just a stress. It doesn't know the difference. So when you compound all these stresses on top of each other, you're going to see exhaustion. So you have to balance all of it, all right? So take, for example, a person who works full-time. They have a full-time job, 9 to 5, and they're busy, right? They're going to work, they deal with deadlines, they deal with bosses, they don't have control over their own schedule per se. They get to work, they have to stay to work. I mean, that's stressful. It's a good stress, right? Nobody wants to not have a job if they need one. So that is a good stress. But then they also want to be a good athlete. So before work, they train, or after work, they train. Okay, so you took exercise, which is a stress, and you put it on top of work, which is a stress. If you don't think that impacts that athlete more than the athlete who doesn't work, you're crazy, because it absolutely does. Now, I wouldn't say funny, but it's not thought about enough by enough people. A lot of people will look at the schedules of professional athletes and go, oh, well, okay, I'm going to do that. And all of a sudden they start training at the level of a professional athlete, yet they don't have the resources of a professional athlete. Like a professional athlete, that's their job, if they're a professional athlete, it's their job to stay in shape. So depending on the sport, it's their job to run 5 miles in the morning. And then it's their job to lift weights. And then it's their job to go to the team practices. It's their job. So with that job comes massage therapists, comes nutritionists, comes housekeepers, people fixing their meals. Like, those are the luxuries most normal people don't have. Yet normal people try to pull off the athlete's workout schedule, and do their own schedule, and most likely have a home schedule. Get dinner ready for the spouse, or whichever direction that goes. Clean house, take care of their pets, and sometimes the poor kids in those households. I mean, who's watching over them? I mean, it's a tough balance, and there are people that sometimes say, I'm not going to do some of these sports until I retire, because it's not fair to my health and it's not fair to my family, and that's noble. I think if we're overdoing it and we have a life outside of it, and to me, that's kind of selfish, right? I mean, we can absolutely stay in shape on an hour a day, hour and a half a day. I mean, my workout schedule is typically, if you average it all out, about an hour and a half a day, and I think that's very manageable. It's very good. I don't think I can really achieve much more fitness than that anyway. But I think when we're really taking it to extremes and we have a full-time life on top of it, we're definitely going to get into much stress. Okay? So estrogen takes the big hit for women when they're overstressed. And if we start to deplete too much of our estrogen, then we get into low bone density issues. And that's why sometimes we see with some of the chronic exercises and chronic undereaters, you see a lot of osteomalacia first, softening of the bone, osteopenia, and then full-on osteoporosis, because the estrogen levels have been depleted so much from overstressing of the system and lowering too much of the estrogen. And with the eating disorders, the chronic undereating or the overexercising, which really they're all in that same camp, and then the women do not have their menstrual cycles, and then it becomes very hard to become fertile. And all that stuff. And of course, that's very bad for your overall health and skeletal system. So that's where the estrogen plays a role. Now, the same thing can happen for men with testosterone. If they're overtrained and overstressed, they're going to lower their testosterone. Now, if you lower the testosterone, it's also going to affect literally your sexual performance and prowess. It's going to affect your performance working out. I mean, testosterone is the key to adding muscle. It is the key to feeling strong in your workouts. It's the key to having more endurance. And when we overtrain, overstress, and get into that exhaustion stage, we're lowering our testosterone levels. So the sex hormones definitely play a role. All right. I talked about adrenaline a little bit. We should know some of the happy hormones. Okay. Let me give you another one. Leptin is the hormone that it gets secreted when you feel full. There's been some studies that say that people who are chronically obese have lower levels of leptin, and then they're trying to treat that with a drug, basically a synthetic version of leptin. I don't know how I feel about all that. I think there's hormones related to obesity for sure, and cortisol levels and all that kind of stuff. And leptin is the hormone that gets secreted when we feel satiated, when we feel full. I don't know, it might be a reach to say that chronic obesity have lower levels of leptin, and by the way, that has not been substantiated in the studies, so may just be a way to push a drug, right? Some of the happy hormones, we got dopamine, endorphin, serotonin, and oxytocin. So dopamine and endorphin and serotonin are happy hormones, and they do get released when we get that feeling of runner's high. And that does exist. They found that it exists. There's absolutely such a thing, exercise high. Now, if we overdo it, and I'll know right away, I mean, my mood tells me, I mean, that's kind of the good thing about me, and maybe not so good for the people around me, is like, I know, like, I can't contain myself very well. I mean, my emotions show on my face. So, like, if I've had a great workout because I took it just to that good, healthy point of intensity and volume, then I'm going to feel good the rest of the day. Like, if I had a really good swim and it was 35 minutes or whatever, and, I pushed, but I didn't over push, and I got out of the pool, I'm going to feel really good, whistling to work, literally. And then there'll be days where I pushed it too hard on a run or something like that. And then afterwards, I'm just in, the old classic shit-eating mood, right? Well, your positive, happy hormones took a dive. Your dopamine, that's what I tried to say, your dopamine and serotonin and endorphins took a dive. Cortisol level comes up, and you're in a bad mood. I mean, that's just what happens when we don't balance our hormones very well. When people are chronically overtrained, they're in a bad mood all the time. Bodybuilders who are training for a bodybuilding show are in a bad mood all the time because their hormones are out of whack. Another little fun fact of a hormone is the oxytocin. So oxytocin is the sex and love hormone. So, when you're feeling pleased sexually, when you are hugging, when you're kissing, you have other hormones going off. Yes. But we also have oxytocin, which is our body telling us this is what we want. I mean, if it weren't for these hormones, we wouldn't be attracted to other people, and therefore we wouldn't be propagating the species, right? So these things are really, really important, and that's what oxytocin is. That's your happy hormones sexually, so to say. All right, so now that you got a little history on your hormones, all right? So again, how do we balance it? Again, periodization is used with professional athletes, and I use a form of it with the people I train, and especially the endurance athletes, because that's the most stressful. It's funny when I hear people say sometimes, well, I'm afraid to go to the gym and work out hard, so I'll stress on the body. It's reality-wise, weight training, if you train like an idiot and you train too heavy with super low reps and ballistically, yes, of course you can get hurt, but, that's your choice. Don't do that, right? But if you're training smart with resistance training, it's actually far less stressful than a 4-mile run or a 25-mile bike or a 3,000-yard swim. Like, as far as the amount of stress on your body, it's pretty low. And one way you know that is just look at the volume. In other words, total work for humans is calorie output. So, like, if you look at how many calories you actually burn during a strength training workout, and it's a legitimate, like, a lot of these watches are not very good at calculating, but legitimate, you're going to see the amount of stress and work isn't that high. So it doesn't tax the system as much because there's a lot of rest involved in a strength training workout. But if you think of a moderately hard run where you're getting around 180 foot strikes per minute and you're going for miles, the amount of stress and calorie burn is like 3 times higher than it's going to be in a strength training workout. Absolutely. Maybe more. So the stress isn't really as high. We don't have to use periodization with the strength training athletes or with the clients as much, although we do. Like, we know when to back off, and we always follow progressive overload. 10%. If they did this last time, add 10%, no more, because then you are allowing the adaptation to occur. But with the athletes, with the endurance athletes, we have to use periodization. So it's as simple as getting out a little Excel spreadsheet, figuring out where you are, adding up your miles per week. And that's another myth, is like, well, what about days per week? Yeah, all that matters a little bit. But what we found is it really comes to your weekly volume. If you run 20 miles a week, that's your weekly volume. If you all of a sudden shoot that up to 40 miles per week, you're going to have issues. You're going to break down. So instead, that 20 miles per week should go to 22 miles per week. And then 24 miles per week, and keep going up until you reach a peak. And you want to reach a peak. And you do that with all of the exercise. And another little rule of periodization is you don't increase two things at once. There's your second rule. One, make sure you only go up 10% per week. That's your first rule. Your next rule is don't increase two things at once. Don't go from I'm going to add volume and now I'm going to do hard workouts. So I'm going to add volume and I'm going to add a speed day. So I'm going to turn this 3-mile run day into a 3-mile interval day. Well, now you've increased both. So once you reach your peak as far as the duration you're going to go, your volume, then you start slowly increasing up the intensity. Then you worry about making it harder, but you do it in a programmed fashion. And then the third critical rule is take a break. So every 4th week, start to back off. Do 50 to 75% of your volume. You're not going to lose fitness, you're going to gain fitness. So in other words, if you're running 20 miles a week consecutively, right? Get to your 4th week and do 15, period. And studies have shown you don't really need to back off the intensity, just back off the volume. And then going back the next week, so your 5th week, you're just back to week 3. You're where you were, and then you pick up from there. And you just keep going up the staircase like that. And it works very, very well. I have a little thing that I do for runners. I track it for myself. And then the final point is just make sure that you are resting. Don't overdo it, man. I'm telling you right now, if you're push, what are you pushing for? Ask yourself that key question. Like, what are you trying to do? If you're an athlete and you keep pushing, I promise you that extra mile isn't going to put you in the Olympics. You'd have been there by now, okay? Some of this is just understanding your potential, right? There's nothing wrong with just getting better consecutively, consistently. That's a great thing. I think a lot of times people drive themselves into the ground because they're chasing after unrealistic expectations. They think the difference between them and the pros is they don't train as hard as the pros. No, that's not it. The real reason is you don't have the ability of the pros. That's just how it is. Now, pros can overtrain too, but remember, they have resources to help them not to. That's critical. It is their job. And there's nothing wrong with not being a professional athlete or professional bodybuilder or whatever it might be. Be the best you. So I do think a lot of overtraining happens because of, there are definitely a lot of eating issues we have in our country especially. And there are a lot of expectation issues in our country as well. Meaning, sometimes not having enough to worry about can be a negative thing. And if you go to some of the other countries where they're worrying about where they're going to get their next meal or if they're going to be safe when they wake up in the morning, they have enough real stress that they don't create stress that they don't need. But sometimes when we don't have that, we start piling all these unrealistic levels of deadlines, over-exercising and under-eating onto ourselves, which we wouldn't do if we had essentially more to worry about. So look in the mirror and say, hey man, I'm good enough, I'm fit, I'm doing my work, and find that happy balance. Find that happy balance to where you can put your head on your pillow at the end of the day and get a good night's sleep, because that is a very good sign that you're not overstressed, because a lot of people who get into this exhaustion stage can't sleep, and you talk about a double whammy. Don't do that, people. All right, so let me now thank our Istanbul Turkish Mediterranean cuisine. They are on Young Street at Ormond Beach, and they have some great vegetarian, good, healthy meals. Please give them a shout. You can do an order on takeout at istanbulflorida.com. Take care, people.